I've camped alone most of my adult life, and I've always believed that solitude doesn't have to mean danger. But Yosemite changed the way I see people. It changed the way I listen to silence. My name's Aaron, I'm 46 years old, and for the past 6 months I'd been traveling the western states in my RV, a white and silver Class C that still smelled like new carpet and adventure. I'd left behind a desk job, an apartment full of quiet neighbors, and the dull hum of routine. Out on the road, the air felt cleaner, my thoughts clearer. I liked being self-contained, my own power, my own water, my own space. I liked the illusion of control. That illusion didn't last long in Yosemite. I pulled into Upper Pines Campground late one October afternoon. The air was sharp, crisp, and smelled faintly of smoke from the nearby controlled burns. The granite cliffs caught the dying sunlight like fire, glowing gold and then fading to blue shadows that crept over the valley. The ranger had told me the park was unusually empty for the season. The last of the fall campers had cleared out after the first cold snap, so I was surprised to find another RV parked 2 spaces down from mine. It was older, a faded beige rig with duct-taped windows and a small mountain of chopped firewood stacked beside it. Someone was there. I could feel it, that subtle awareness you get when you're being watched, even when your back is turned. I shook it off. I was tired, and tiredness blurs instinct. I went through the usual motions, leveling the rig, hooking up water and power, pulling the blinds halfway for privacy. I heated a can of soup on the stove and watched dusk turn to night. The park went utterly still, except for the distant crackle of a campfire somewhere up the road and the occasional pop of pine cones bursting in the heat. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps against the side door. Not the hurried kind, not the friendly, "hey neighbor" kind. Measured, controlled, like someone who wanted me to know they were there, but not why. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. "Hello," I called, trying to sound casual. A man's voice answered, calm, friendly. "Hey there. Sorry to bother you. Just wanted to say hi. Didn't think anyone else was still camping this week." I hesitated before opening the door. I'd met plenty of fellow campers on the road, kind people, most of them, but something about the timing made me uneasy. Still, I cracked the door open halfway. He looked to be in his early 50s, tall and lean, wearing a weathered flannel and jeans. His beard was gray, trimmed, eyes an odd shade of pale blue that caught the light from my RV's interior. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Name's Mark," he said. "Been on the road a while myself. Saw your rig and figured I'd come introduce myself. Always nice to know who's nearby in case of, wildlife or whatever." His voice was steady, maybe too steady. The kind of voice that practiced charm instead of feeling it. I thanked him, introduced myself, and made small talk, where we were from, where we were headed. He said he'd been traveling solo for a couple of years, mostly through national parks, living simple. Something about the way he said it, living simple, made me imagine someone who'd been out here longer than he should have. Someone who preferred being away from rules. He glanced past me into the RV. His eyes lingered a little too long on the inside. The setup, the layout, the personal things. Then he smiled again, said goodnight, and walked back toward his rig. I locked the door. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind came through the valley in soft waves, pressing against the RV walls with a low moan. I lay there listening to the woods breathe, pine branches creaking, faint scurrying under the gravel. I told myself the unease was just exhaustion. I'd been driving all day, running on caffeine and adrenaline. But around midnight, I woke again. Headlights flickered across my ceiling. They weren't mine. Through the slats of the blinds, I saw Mark's RV, dark, silent, and a beam of light moving slowly between our 2 rigs, like someone walking with a flashlight, scanning. I could hear the gravel crunching under boots. I held my breath, too afraid to move the blinds. The footsteps paused right outside my door, then a faint tap, not on the metal but on the glass window this time. Deliberate, testing. I whispered to myself, "It's fine, it's nothing." And for a moment, the footsteps faded. I thought he was gone. Then I heard it, a low laugh, just one breath of it. close enough that I could tell it came from his throat, not his nose. Then silence again. When morning came, I told myself I'd imagined it. Sunlight makes skeptics of us all. I stepped out with a thermos of coffee, pretending nothing had happened. Mark was sitting outside his RV, stirring something in a tin mug. He waved. "Morning, neighbor," he said. "Sleep okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, pretty good." He nodded, eyes following me as I walked toward the bear locker. "You know," he said, "I thought I heard something weird last night. Sounded like footsteps around your RV. Figured it was a bear or something." It took everything in me not to flinch. I didn't answer, just poured my coffee and said something about checking out one of the nearby trails. He grinned. "Good idea. I'll join you." The way he said it wasn't a question. I spent the next hour pretending to pack for a hike while my stomach twisted. I didn't want to be rude, but every instinct told me to create distance. I left a note on my dashboard, "Back later, hiking Mist Trail," and started walking toward the shuttle stop. But once I was out of view, I circled around through the trees. I wanted to see what he'd do if he thought I was gone. He stood outside my RV for a long time. Too long, hands in pockets, just staring. Then he walked around the side like he was checking something, slow, methodical. When he finally went back to his own rig, I slipped into the trees, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I didn't go hiking that day. I drove. Out of the campground, past the valley, up toward Tioga Road, where the altitude thins the air and cell signal is a rumor. I parked at a turnout overlooking a cliff and sat there for hours, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. He hadn't done anything wrong, not really. Maybe he was just lonely, just another traveler trying to connect. But that's the thing about loneliness. It can twist people. You never know which way it bends them. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, I decided I'd return just long enough to pack up and leave the park. I didn't want to drive the winding descent in darkness, but I wanted even less to sleep under that same sky with him nearby. When I pulled back into camp, Mark's RV was gone. The relief that washed over me was so sharp it almost felt painful. I packed quickly, double-checking every latch and drawer, hands shaking. The forest was quiet, unnaturally so. No chatter, no wind, just that still, cold air that falls right before night. I turned the ignition. The engine coughed once, then died. The battery light flickered, and for a moment I thought I'd left the interior lights on all day. But the dashboard clock was blinking. Reset. Someone had drained it or pulled something. My heart thudded. I tried again. Nothing but a click. Then, through the side mirror, I saw the reflection of headlights turning down the campground road, and the shape of a beige RV crawling slowly toward mine. The headlights crawled closer, slow, almost hesitant, until their glow washed over the pines and spilled across my windshield. I could see the dust rising in the beams, small white motes swirling like ash. My stomach clenched. It was him, that same beige RV, creeping toward my sight like an animal returning to a scent it recognized. For a moment I couldn't move. My body had gone completely still, the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from a survival instinct older than thought. I reached for my phone, hoping for signal. Nothing. Just the hollow bar icon in the corner of the screen. I turned off my interior lights. The RV became a dark shell, hiding me inside. The other vehicle stopped about 30 feet away. The engine idled, that low diesel rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. I watched through the blinds, just a sliver open. The driver's door opened. A beam of light cut through the trees, his flashlight again. I ducked down instinctively, heart hammering in my throat. Footsteps on gravel, steady, unhurried. He was walking toward me. My mind raced through possibilities. Pretend I'm asleep, confront him, call out. But the sound of him approaching, the scrape of his boots, the crunch of grit, froze every option before it could form. He stopped just outside the driver's side window. I could see his shadow stretching across the RV's hood, tall, angular. Then came the sound of metal tapping glass, not a knock this time, a scrape, slow, like he was dragging something along the edge of the window. Every muscle in me tightened. I wanted to scream, to honk the horn, anything, but the silence in that moment felt sacred, like breaking it would trigger something worse. Then his voice, soft, calm, familiar, drifted through the thin layer of glass. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Aaron. Dangerous place for a woman by herself." Hearing my name snapped something inside me. I hadn't told him my last name, hadn't even mentioned it, but he said it with certainty, like it was something he'd repeated to himself. I grabbed the small flashlight from the counter and shone it at the side window, bright enough to break the illusion of darkness between us. The beam caught his face just for an instant, those pale eyes, that faint smile again. Then he turned and walked back toward his RV. I stayed frozen for what felt like forever before I finally dared to breathe again. When I did, it came out shaky, uneven, like my lungs had forgotten how. He didn't leave. His engine stayed running, humming in the distance. I sat there in the dark until exhaustion blurred everything into a kind of numb fog. At some point, I must have drifted off sitting up, because the next thing I remember was daylight slicing through the blinds. His rig was gone again. So was the stack of firewood that had been beside it. I didn't waste a second. I tried the ignition again, and by some small mercy it turned over this time. The relief that hit me felt like air after drowning. I didn't even hook up my sewer line or check the hoses, just threw everything loose into drawers and drove out, tires spitting gravel behind me. I made it about 10 miles down Tioga Road before pulling into a small turnout to breathe. My hands were trembling so badly I had to brace them on the steering wheel. I told myself it was over, that I was safe now, that whatever weirdness that was, it was behind me. But the strangest thing about fear is how it lingers even when logic says you're fine. It sits just under your skin, whispering possibilities. I drove toward the park exit. The road curved through towering pines, sunlight flickering through branches like strobe lights. Around one of the bends, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A beige RV, parked on the shoulder. Empty. Engine off. The driver's door hung open. I slowed down but didn't stop. Just kept my eyes forward, knuckles white on the wheel. As I passed, I glanced once into the rearview mirror. No one was there. But a few miles later, a new sound started. Faint at first. A tapping. Rhythmic. Metallic. It came from the rear storage compartment, the one that locks from the outside. I pulled over fast, heart pounding, jumped out and ran around to the back. The latch looked normal. No damage, no signs of tampering. I lifted it open. Nothing inside except my camping chairs and a spare gas can. I stood there in the cold morning air, trying to steady my breathing. Maybe something had shifted while driving. Just noise, just my nerves. Still, I kept driving. By late afternoon, I reached the gas station near the park's south exit. I filled up, bought a cup of burnt coffee, and told myself again that I was fine. That's when I noticed something stuck under my windshield wiper. A piece of paper folded neatly, no handwriting, no note, just a small printed photo, one of those cheap instant kinds of my RV taken from behind. You could see my license plate, and in the corner of the frame, his RV, half hidden by trees. The air left my lungs. I looked around the lot, tourists, a Ranger truck, 2 motorcycles, no beige RV, but I felt that same static in my chest, that sense of being watched from just beyond what I could see. I went inside, showed the clerk the photo, and asked if there was a ranger station nearby. He frowned, said yeah, about 2 miles down, but when I offered the picture, he just shook his head. "We get weird folks out here," he said. "Best thing, don't engage. Just leave." So that's what I did. I drove straight out of Yosemite, following the long curve of Highway 120 until the valley disappeared behind me. The further I got, the easier it was to breathe. The trees thinned, replaced by open hills, then scrubland. I found a private campground near Groveland and parked there for the night, surrounded by other travelers, laughter, campfires, civilization. It felt safer. Or so I thought. Just past midnight, as I was journaling by the small reading light, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A vehicle pulling into the campground road. I didn't even look out at first. There were plenty of campers arriving late. Then the headlights passed by my window and lingered, not moving, just idling there. I turned off the light and peered through the blinds. A beige RV sat across the lane, engine running, lights on. I couldn't see the driver through the glare of the windshield, but I didn't have to. I knew. My body went cold. The way the vehicle sat there, facing me, not moving, felt deliberate, like a silent reminder that he could find me anywhere. I grabbed my keys, phone, and flashlight. I didn't even bother disconnecting the hookups this time. I turned the ignition, thank God it started, and pulled out fast, gravel spitting, the rear of the RV fishtailing as I accelerated onto the main road. In the rear view, the beige RV followed. Its headlights grew smaller as the distance widened, but every time I turned a corner, they'd appear again, keeping pace. For miles, that pattern continued. Lose sight, see them again. The empty stretch of mountain highway seemed endless. My mind raced through possibilities. Drive to a police station, a 24-hour store. What if he was just following to intimidate me, like not chase me? What if I stopped and made it worse? Finally, near the edge of Groveland, I saw a small gas station lit like a beacon in the dark. I pulled in hard, right up next to the door, so close I could have stepped straight inside without unlocking the handle. The attendant, a young guy, half asleep at the counter, looked startled when I burst in. "Call the sheriff," I said. "There's a man following me." He blinked, nodded slowly, reached for the phone. I turned back toward the lot, and the beige RV was parked across the street, engine still idling, headlights off now. Just sitting there, dark and silent. Minutes later, the flashing lights of a sheriff's cruiser cut through the night, and that's when the beige RV pulled away. Smooth, quiet, vanishing down the road as if nothing had happened. The deputy took my statement. I gave every detail I could remember, his name, his description, even the photo. He nodded, said they'd check it out, maybe catch him on one of the park cameras, but his tone had that weary edge, like he'd heard versions of this story before. Before I left, I asked him something that still haunts me. "Do you think he'll come back?" The deputy hesitated. Then he said, "People like that don't chase because they want something. They chase because they want you to know they could." The sheriff left around 2 in the morning. His cruiser's lights faded into the dark, leaving the world too quiet again. That kind of quiet that's more like pressure than peace. I sat inside the gas station parking lot with the engine running, hands still trembling on the wheel. The air smelled faintly of diesel and rain-soaked asphalt. I kept expecting to see those beige headlights return over the hill, but they never did. When dawn broke, I drove without a destination. Just kept moving. West, out of the mountains, past Modesto, until the pines gave way to fields and the sky opened up. Only then did I stop. I parked at a rest area off Highway 99 and just sat there, staring at the sunlight pouring through the windshield, wondering how something so ordinary could feel so unfamiliar. I didn't go back to Yosemite. I didn't even tell many people about what happened, not right away. The story never sounded quite real when I said it out loud. It sounded like paranoia, like I'd overreacted, even to me. But the truth of fear isn't in the evidence. It's in the feeling that stays long after the danger's gone. For weeks after that night, I kept hearing that sound, the scrape of metal on glass. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes in silence. It would sneak into my mind like static, pulling me back to that moment in the dark. And with it came questions I couldn't stop asking myself. Why didn't I trust my instincts sooner? Why did I open the door in the first place? And most of all, how many times before had I ignored that same quiet warning just because I didn't want to seem rude? It's strange how fear changes your relationship with solitude. Before Yosemite, I saw being alone as strength, proof that I could handle anything, that independence was armor. But that night taught me something different. Solitude doesn't protect you. Awareness does. I started changing small habits after that. I parked where there were cameras. I checked the locks twice. I kept a GPS beacon running even when I didn't think I needed it. I made a rule for myself. If someone made me feel off even slightly, I wouldn't second guess it. I'd just leave. No explanations. No guilt. Because the truth is, danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it offers you coffee and small talk under the trees. It looks human, normal, and that's what makes it terrifying. A few months later, while camping in Oregon, I met a retired ranger named Helen. We got to talking one night around her campfire, the kind of slow, meandering talk that happens when you're both tired and honest. I told her what happened in Yosemite. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to make sense of it. When I finished, she said something I'll never forget. "People like that," she said. "They test boundaries the way animals test fences. They're looking for weakness, not conversation. You can't reason with that." She took a sip of her tea, eyes reflecting the firelight. "But you can learn to recognize it sooner next time. That's what keeps you alive." For a long time, I didn't know if she meant that literally or metaphorically. Maybe both. Since that night, I've crossed the country twice, from California to Maine and back again, sleeping in campgrounds, rest stops, and remote desert pullouts. I still love the sound of wind in the trees, the rhythm of rain on the roof, the quiet mornings when mist curls above the forest floor. But every now and then, when I pull into a new site and see another rig parked just a little too close, I feel that same pulse in my chest, a mix of curiosity and warning, and I listen. Not just to the woods, but to myself, because fear, when you really sit with it, isn't always a threat. Sometimes it's information. Sometimes it's the only honest part of you left in a world that keeps telling you to be polite. There's one more thing. A few weeks after the Yosemite trip, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a ranger from the park. He asked if I'd filed a report about a man in a beige RV. I said yes. He told me they'd found an abandoned rig deep in the forest, off one of the maintenance roads. No plates, no registration, interior stripped out. Looked like someone had been living there a while. They couldn't confirm it was the same man, but something about the description matched. I asked if they'd found him. The ranger hesitated, then said, "No, ma'am. But if you ever see that RV again, don't approach, just call us." That was months ago. I never saw it again. But sometimes when I'm driving a long, empty highway and the sun dips low enough that reflections dance across the windshield, I catch flashes of beige in the distance. A trick of the light, maybe, or memory. Or just a reminder that danger doesn't vanish. It waits in the corners of what we don't want to believe. What I know now is this. The wilderness isn't what haunts me. It's not the shadows between the trees or the silence after dark. It's that quiet voice inside me that once whispered something's wrong, and how easily I talked myself out of listening to it. I used to think courage meant staying calm no matter what. Now I think courage means acting the moment you feel that unease, even when no one else would understand why. That's what Yosemite taught me. When you live on the road, you meet all kinds of people. Most are kind, some are lonely, a few are dangerous, but the one person you have to live with, the one whose judgment you have to trust, is yourself. And maybe that's the real lesson buried inside every story like this one. You don't need monsters to find fear. You just need another human being with the wrong intentions and your own hesitation to believe them capable of it. Every time I set up camp now, I take a moment before shutting off the engine. I look around, not for threats, not for ghosts, but for stillness, for how the air feels. If it feels off, I go. Simple as that. It doesn't matter how beautiful the view is, how perfect the sky looks, how much you've been driving. If your gut whispers, "not here," listen, because fear isn't weakness, it's warning. And sometimes the only difference between a close call and a headline is how quickly you decide to move. So when people ask me if I still camp alone, I tell them yes, but I'm never really alone anymore. A part of me still lives in that valley, under those cliffs that burn gold at sunset, in that quiet October air. She's there to remind me, trust is a privilege the road doesn't always deserve. And when night falls and the forest presses close again and I hear the distant hum of an engine through the trees, I don't let fear take me. I let it guide me, because the road teaches you, sometimes the hardest way, that survival isn't about bravery. It's about believing yourself the first time you feel unsafe. And I will never forget the night Yosemite made me learn that lesson. I thought silence would heal me, That was the idea, to drive until the noise of everything I'd lost faded into the wind and I could finally breathe again. But when I pulled my RV into Grand Canyon National Park that October evening, the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like something waiting. My name's Lauren. I'm 36, and this was supposed to be my reset trip. I'd quit my job 2 months before, packed up my life into a silver Volkswagen camper van, and told myself I'd find a way to live again by seeing the places we never got to see, the ones we always said we would. We. Even now, I still say it like he's here. The last time I stood at the Grand Canyon, it was with Daniel. We were in our 20s, broke, reckless, and alive in a way I can't seem to remember how to be. When he died in that accident last winter, I started driving, like maybe if I kept moving, the world wouldn't catch up, but it always does, especially here. The air that night was colder than I expected. High desert cold, sharp and dry. I found a small campground west of Mather Point, one of those tucked away spots not far from the main rim, but far enough that you could go a whole evening without seeing another soul. I liked that, or at least I thought I did. The ranger at the entrance had said something strange as I drove in. "People get turned around out here," he told me, scanning my permit. "Even near the rim, the terrain can shift on you at night. Just stay close to your sight." I laughed politely, like any tourist would, but his tone wasn't casual. It was warning. By the time I parked, twilight had already started to melt into that deep canyon darkness, the kind that swallows light whole. I made a small fire, sat outside the van, and tried to eat dinner, but the food turned to dust in my mouth. The quiet pressed in heavy. No cicadas, no crickets, not even the faint hum of other campers. Just wind, dry and low, whispering through the pines. I kept glancing toward the edge of the clearing, the line where the trees began. They looked strange in the firelight, their trunks black and unbroken like the shadows of pillars that held up the night itself. That's when I noticed something. The smell. It wasn't smoke or pine or dirt. It was faintly metallic, like wet iron. Blood, maybe, or rust. It came and went with the wind, soft but unmistakable. I told myself it was just the fire, maybe the grate or some mineral in the soil. But it made me think of hospitals, of the way Daniel's room smelled the night he died. I put out the fire and went inside the van. The Volkswagen was my little moving world, warm light, familiar smells, the hum of the fridge. It felt safe, almost cozy. I drew the curtains, turned on a soft playlist I'd made for nights like this, and wrote in my journal for a while. I wrote about how I wanted to feel brave, how I wanted to feel something other than regret. Then I heard the first sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles brushing lightly against the metal side of the van. Not hard, just enough to make my heart stop. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. It wasn't wind. It was deliberate. I turned off the music and listened. Silence. I told myself it could be the trees, a branch scraping the roof, or maybe an animal. Raccoons, maybe. Coyotes. But I knew the sound of animals. This was closer, human close. The air inside the van thickened with that old, familiar feeling, panic clawing at reason. I wanted to peek through the curtain, but part of me didn't want to know. And then, as suddenly as it began, the tapping stopped. I waited a long time before I turned the music back on. I barely slept. In the morning, everything looked normal. Too normal. Bright sunlight, clean air, quiet roads. There were 2 other RVs parked about 100 yards away, but they looked empty. I stepped outside with my coffee and noticed something strange near the back wheel. Footprints, not boots or sneakers, bare feet, small, adult-sized. The soil was dry, but the impressions were fresh enough that they still held shape. Someone had been standing right beside my van. My first instinct was to take a photo, but I hesitated. I didn't want proof. Proof would mean it actually happened. I went for a drive instead, down toward the south rim where tourists gathered near the overlooks. I needed to see people, needed to feel like I wasn't going crazy. At one of the viewpoints, I met a woman in her 50s named Carol who was traveling in a trailer a few sites over. She was friendly in that overtired, road-weary way travelers often are. We shared small talk about campgrounds and weather, and she mentioned something I couldn't shake. "You camping out west of Mather?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" She frowned. "Be careful out there. I heard a guy went missing last month. They found his van still running, just empty." She said it like she didn't want to believe it herself. That afternoon, clouds rolled in, thick and low, like smoke from an unseen fire. The wind carried dust, and the temperature dropped fast. By dusk, the campground was empty again. I could have left, but I didn't. Something in me, pride, stubbornness, maybe guilt, told me to stay. To prove to myself I wasn't afraid, that I wasn't fragile. But fear isn't always about what's outside. Sometimes it's the thing inside you that's waiting for quiet to finally speak. That night, I didn't build a fire. I wanted darkness. I wanted to face it. I sat in the van with the lights off, listening to the wind move through the trees. Around midnight, the tapping returned. This time, it wasn't on the side of the van. It was on the rear door. 3 slow knocks. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Knock, knock, knock. Then, silence. Something brushed against the door handle. I heard the faintest click, like someone testing it. I whispered his name without meaning to, Daniel, and immediately felt stupid. But in that instant, I could have sworn I heard a breath, right outside. A slow exhale. Human. Close. Then footsteps, light, slow, fading into the trees. I stayed awake until dawn. When I finally stepped outside, the first thing I noticed was that same metallic smell again, stronger this time. It came from the direction of the woods, and there, at the edge of the tree line, a single white shoelace tied around a branch. It fluttered in the wind like a flag or maybe a warning. I don't remember tying it. I don't remember bringing anything like it, but I recognized the knot. It was the same way Daniel used to tie his hiking boots, and suddenly I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I don't know how long I stood there staring at that shoelace. The air was thin, brittle. My breath came out in short, uneven bursts. I kept waiting for something else to happen. A noise, a shadow, a sign that it wasn't what I thought it was. But nothing came. Just the wind, brushing the pines, carrying that faint metallic smell through the air like memory itself was rotting. It had to be a coincidence. That's what I told myself. People tie things to trees all the time out here, for markers, for luck, for no reason at all. But deep down, I knew that knot. The twist of the lace, the double loop he used to do when we hiked, like he was afraid of coming undone. I untied it, stuffed it into my pocket, and went back inside the van. The air felt different, heavy, as if someone else had been inside while I slept. My things looked untouched, but the atmosphere was wrong. You don't always need proof to know you're not alone. Sometimes your body just tells you. I made coffee, though I didn't really drink it. The act of doing something normal felt like survival. Then I drove, nowhere in particular, just down the rim road, the canyon stretching endlessly beside me, that impossible void of red and shadow. The Grand Canyon is strange that way. Beautiful, yes, but also oppressive. The scale of it feels unnatural, almost hostile, like the earth itself carved a wound so deep it never closed. I parked at a small overlook with no other cars and stepped out. The wind hit hard. It was stronger up there, pushing against me, dragging strands of my hair across my face. The sky was washed pale, sun behind thin clouds. I looked down into that vast emptiness and thought about how easy it would be to disappear out here, not just physically, but completely. That's when I noticed a man standing about 50 feet to my left. He wasn't moving, just staring into the canyon. Something about him felt wrong from the start. It wasn't his posture, exactly. It was too still, too intent. Like he wasn't seeing the canyon at all, but something inside it. He wore a dark jacket, hood up, hands in pockets. I thought about saying something, a simple hello, but the words stuck in my throat. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me. So I left. When I got back to camp, the clouds were thicker. A storm was building somewhere out beyond the horizon. The air had that electric smell before rain, mixed again with that metallic scent I couldn't escape. My nerves were thin by then. Everything felt like a sign. The way branches swayed, the hollow knock of pine cones against the van roof, the way dusk fell too quickly, swallowing the light like the canyon itself was inhaling the day. I told myself to leave in the morning. I'd go south, maybe Sedona or Prescott, somewhere with people, voices, music. But I didn't make it to morning. Around 10 that night, I was sitting inside the van, lights off, staring at the dark reflection of my own face in the window. The rain had started, light at first, tapping against the roof in uneven rhythms. Then a flicker of light outside. A flashlight beam, sweeping slowly across the ground, cutting through the mist. Someone was walking between the trees. My first thought was Ranger Patrol. My second, Carol, maybe checking in. But the longer I watched, the more wrong it looked. The beam wasn't steady. It swayed, sometimes jerking upward, then pausing like the person holding it didn't quite know where they were going. It circled once, twice, then disappeared behind a stand of trees near the back of my sight. Silence again. Just rain. Then, that smell. Strong this time, pushing through the thin crack of the window. Sharp. Rust and soil. I grabbed my keys, ready to start the engine if I had to, but then, movement. Something passed right in front of my headlights. Not close enough to see clearly, but close enough that I knew it wasn't an animal. The shape paused, turned toward the van, and for the briefest moment I caught the gleam of wet fabric, like a jacket soaked through with rain. And then it was gone. I don't remember deciding to move, but my hands were on the ignition, my foot on the pedal, before I even thought about it. The van roared to life, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. I pulled out fast, gravel spitting behind the tires. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. The campground road wound through dense pines, narrow and twisting. The rain made everything shine, the road, the branches, the reflective posts flashing like eyes. I drove without looking back. At one point, I thought I saw someone standing by the road. A figure, tall, still, head turned toward me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I finally reached the main road near the visitor center, I pulled over and sat there, engine idling, trying to breathe. I told myself I'd wait until morning, check into a motel, call someone, anyone. But even there, in the supposed safety of the asphalt and lamplight, the world didn't feel right. The light seemed too dim, the silence too deep, and when I looked down at my hands gripping the steering wheel, there was dirt under my fingernails. Dark, wet dirt. I hadn't touched the ground since morning. I stared at it for a long time, then wiped my hands on my jeans. I didn't want to think about what that meant. I must have dozed off for a while because when I opened my eyes, it was gray daylight. The rain had stopped. I drove straight to the ranger station, told them there'd been someone near my site last night, someone walking around, maybe following me. The ranger, an older man with sun-cracked skin, frowned as I talked. When I mentioned the footprints, the shoelace, and the light, he looked away for a long moment before speaking. "You said you were in Site 22? "Yeah," I said. He nodded slowly. "We closed that site last month, after the incident." "What incident?" He hesitated. "A camper went missing out there. Woman traveling alone. They never found her. Her van was still there in the morning, keys in the ignition." I stared at him, waiting for him to say something more, that it was a misunderstanding, a mix-up. But he didn't. Instead, he stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was a white shoelace. "This was found tied to a branch near her site," he said quietly. "We thought it might have been a signal or maybe something she dropped." The room seemed to tilt. I couldn't breathe, because it was the same lace, the same knot, the same everything, except mine was gone. When I reached into my pocket to show him, to prove I wasn't imagining it, my pocket was empty. No lace, no proof. He watched me closely then, like he could see something unraveling in my face. "Maybe you should take a break from camping for a while," he said gently. "Some places, they hold on to things." I left without another word. I drove out of the park, the road unfurling behind me in long, empty miles. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky that impossible Arizona blue. And yet, even as I drove, I could still smell it, faint, metallic, clinging to the air vents, to my hands, like to the inside of my throat. I should have turned the van around, reported everything, demanded answers. But I didn't, because deep down I already knew. Some places don't let you leave the way you came, and some grief doesn't either. That night, I stopped at a rest area off Highway 64. The sun was setting behind the mesas, the light turning gold and red like the canyon walls. I sat outside with a blanket, trying to tell myself it was over. Then I looked down. At my feet, pressed lightly into the dirt, were two sets of footprints. One mine, small, booted, the other, bare. I told myself not to look up, not to follow where they led. But the air shifted again, carrying that same faint scent, and I knew, whether it was Daniel, the missing woman, or something the canyon itself had breathed into me, I'd never really be alone again. By the time I crossed out of the park boundaries, the landscape had flattened into desert again. Wide stretches of ochre and scrub that looked like they'd been burned clean of sound. The road shimmered in the heat, and the horizon bent under the weight of distance. It should have felt like freedom. It didn't. I stopped at a gas station somewhere outside Williams, one of those lonely places with two pumps and a vending machine that ate your quarters. The attendant didn't even look up when I went inside. The air smelled like dust and motor oil. Familiar, almost comforting. I bought a bottle of water, but my hands shook too much to open it. When I caught my reflection in the glass door, I didn't recognize myself. Hair matted, eyes hollow. The part that scared me most wasn't what had happened at the canyon. It was how close it all felt to something inside me. Like the fear had always been there, waiting for quiet to take its shape. I thought about Daniel, about how we used to talk about coming back here when we were older, how he'd joked about buying a little RV, seeing America the slow way. He loved that phrase, the slow way. He said you could hear the world breathe if you drove slowly enough. I sat in the van for a long time, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, watching dust swirl in the late afternoon sun. And then I realized what the ranger meant. About places that hold on to things. Maybe the canyon doesn't keep the people who vanish there. Maybe it keeps the parts of us we leave behind. The guilt, the grief, the unanswered things we think distance will fix. I started the engine. The van rattled softly, like it was waking up too. For miles I drove without music, just the sound of tires against the road and the low whistle of wind through the window seam. The world outside glowed red and gold, an afterimage of everything I was trying to forget. Somewhere between Flagstaff and nowhere, I finally spoke out loud. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was talking to. Maybe Daniel, maybe the woman who disappeared, maybe myself. The air shifted when I said it, a faint tremor, almost a sigh. I should have felt crazy, but I didn't. I felt seen. When night came, I pulled over again, a rest stop surrounded by open desert, no trees, no shadows. I made tea on the small stove, the way I used to when we camped together. The steam curled upward, disappearing into the dark. For the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not the kind of crying that begs for comfort, but the kind that empties you. And in that silence, I realized something else. All those things I'd been running from. The accident, the guilt, the empty house, the endless noise of other people's lives. They'd found me here because they were supposed to. Grief doesn't haunt you. It waits for you to listen. The Grand Canyon is still out there, that vast, open wound in the earth, and maybe in a way, it's a wound in me too. Some nights, when I stop along another lonely stretch of road, I swear I can smell that faint metallic tang again. It doesn't scare me anymore. It just reminds me that some things never go away. They just change shape. I keep driving. Always a little farther than I planned. Sometimes in the side mirror, I think I see someone walking behind the van, just a flicker, a shadow against the dust. Barefoot, steady, unhurried. Maybe it's my mind. Maybe it's him. Maybe it's what's left of everything I've tried to bury. But I don't stop. I drive into the night, headlights cutting through the dark, the road unwinding like a promise I still believe in, that even after everything that's taken from you, even after the canyon swallows the light, there's still a way forward. And somewhere out there, past the horizon, maybe silence isn't waiting to hurt me anymore. Maybe it's waiting to forgive. I don't remember exactly when I stopped sleeping through the night. Maybe it started somewhere between the red cliffs and the long, empty highway that led me toward Zion. Or maybe it started before that. before I even turned the key in the ignition and told myself this trip was about peace, healing, starting over. My name's Mara, 34, and I live most of my life out of a Class C RV that I bought after the worst year of my life. It's small but self-contained. A bed, a kitchenette, a shower I barely use, and a window that always smells faintly of dust and pine resin. People tell me it's brave, traveling alone. They don't see how sometimes bravery and running away look exactly the same. That night, when I first pulled into Watchman Campground, the desert air was still radiating heat from the day. It was mid-September, hot enough to make the rocks glow under the dying sun, cool enough at night for the cold to sneak into your sleeves. The campsites were almost full, the hum of generators and quiet conversations drifting like static in the dry air. I parked under a cottonwood tree, leveled the RV, and told myself this would be different. No more watching the news on my phone until 2 a.m., no more checking locks twice. Just peace. The hum of the fridge, the soft groan of the desert wind, and me. When you travel alone long enough, you develop a sixth sense for the people around you. The ones who keep to themselves, the ones who drink too much, the ones who want to talk because they're lonely. I'd gotten good at reading those small, silent tells, a voice too casual, a gaze that lingers too long. That first evening, as I was sitting outside with a small campfire and a book I wasn't really reading, I heard footsteps. Someone walked by slow, deliberate, like they wanted to be noticed, but didn't want to seem like it. He was maybe late 40s, early 50s, weathered gray stubble, and a calm voice when he said, "Evenin', beautiful night." I smiled, polite but brief. "Yeah, sure is." He nodded, hands in pockets, and glanced toward my RV. "You traveling solo?" That question always made me tighten up a little. I said, "Just me and my wheels." He chuckled softly. "Brave. Not a lot of women I see out here by themselves." Something about the way he said brave, not admiring, more like assessing, made me lower my gaze. I let the silence hang long enough that he moved on. I watched his back as he walked toward the far loop of the campground, where a small airstream sat in the shadows, silver skin reflecting firelight from someone else's site. I thought that was it, just a passing conversation. But sometimes small encounters leave residue, like static in the air. That night, I woke around 2:30. The desert is a strange kind of quiet. It hums. Crickets, wind scraping through dry branches, far-off coyotes that sound like laughter half buried in static. Then I heard a soft knock, not on the door, on the side panel of the RV. 3 dull thuds, slow, even. At first, I told myself it was an animal. Maybe a branch fell or a raccoon got curious. I froze in my bed, every muscle locked. Then another 3 knocks, louder, lower, deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. After about a minute, the sound stopped. I lay there listening, heart pounding so hard I thought whoever was out there could hear it through the walls. I waited until the first light began to stretch across the horizon before I finally opened the door. Nothing. Just footprints, faint, disturbed sand leading away from the RV toward the cottonwoods. I didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? Someone knocked on my RV in the middle of the night and then walked away? It sounded paranoid even in my own head. That morning, I saw the man again. He was by the communal water spigot, filling up a canteen, smiling that same calm, quiet smile. He looked at me just a little too long. "Sleep okay?" he asked. Something in me twitched, a memory of the sound, those dull knocks reverberating in my skull. "Yeah," I said. "Slept fine." He nodded slowly, like he didn't believe me. By afternoon, most campers had gone hiking. The campground felt emptier, quieter, except for the sound of cicadas buzzing in the heat. I tried to distract myself, made lunch, tidied up, even played music for company. But the feeling that someone had been outside my RV didn't leave. It hung in the air, sour and electric. At sunset, I took a walk toward the river, the light turning the cliffs into burning embers. When I came back, I noticed something small but wrong. My folding chair was moved. Not far. Just enough that it wasn't where I'd left it. I checked the door. Locked. Windows latched. No sign of forced entry. But that chair, That small, stupid detail felt like someone whispering I was here. I told myself maybe the wind moved it. The desert gusts can be strong. But the way it was angled, slightly turned toward the RV's door, made my skin crawl. That night, I left a flashlight near the bed. I tried to sleep, but every sound stretched thin and sharp. The ticking of the cooling engine, the crack of distant branches, the murmur of what might have been voices carried by the canyon wind. At 1:47, my phone buzzed. No signal, just a notification, motion detected on the small dash cam I'd set up inside. When I checked the playback, the screen showed darkness, then a flicker of movement, a shadow crossing in front of the passenger window. Too tall for an animal, too slow for the wind. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped the phone. I turned off every light and sat there, clutching the flashlight, listening. No sound, just the hum of my own pulse. And then, that same pattern of knocks. 3. Pause. 3 again. Only this time it came from the back of the RV. I whispered to myself, "Don't make a sound." The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. It was the kind of silence that has weight, pressing against your ears, waiting. I didn't know if he was gone or standing just out of view, listening for movement inside. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours. Time loses shape when you're too scared to breathe. When dawn finally came, I stepped outside again. The ground was smooth, like the sand had been brushed over. Whoever had been there, if anyone had, didn't want to leave a trace. But there was something new. A small rock, perfectly round, placed on my step. I stood there staring at it, the morning sun rising red behind the cliffs, and I realized my hands were shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't the rock itself, it was the intention. Someone had been close enough to touch my home, to mark it, and for the first time in my months of traveling alone, I wasn't sure if I was the one in control anymore. I thought about leaving right then, packing up, starting the engine, and just driving until the landscape changed, until the red cliffs disappeared in the rearview mirror. But fear does strange things to logic. It convinces you to wait, to rationalize, to look for normal explanations so you don't have to face what you already know. So I stayed. I told myself I'd overreacted. Maybe the knocks were some kids playing a prank. Maybe the rock was kicked up by the wind. The desert's full of weird sounds and coincidences. I'd seen enough of it on the road to know the mind can twist isolation into something darker. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me. That afternoon, I noticed the same man again, the one who'd called me brave. He was standing near the dumpsters at the far end of the loop, hands in his pockets, looking straight at my RV. When I met his eyes, he smiled. Slow. Deliberate. Then turned away, like it was nothing. I went to the campground host that evening, told him someone had been knocking on my RV at night, that I didn't feel safe. He frowned, kind but distracted. "We don't get much trouble here," he said. "Could have been raccoons. You'd be surprised how smart they are." I didn't argue, but as I walked back, I noticed the Airstream, the man's trailer, had its blinds drawn tight, even in the heat. That night, I locked every latch, checked the dash cam, and left the flashlight on the counter. By midnight, I was still awake. My brain kept replaying the sound of those knocks, the shape of that rock on my step, the way he'd said brave like it meant something else. I don't know what made me glance out the side window, maybe instinct, maybe the faint crunch of gravel. He was there, standing between the cottonwoods, half in shadow, facing my RV, not moving, not saying a word. My mouth went dry. I grabbed my phone. No signal again. Zion's beauty is its isolation, but that isolation felt like a trap now. He took a slow step forward. I slid down behind the counter, heart hammering so hard it made my chest ache. The RV's thin walls suddenly felt like paper. Every breath I took sounded too loud. He circled around the front. I could hear his boots against the sand, measured, calm. Then a soft rattle. The door handle. He was testing it. I reached for the keys on the counter and hit the lock again, even though I knew it was already locked. My fingers trembled so badly I could barely grip the metal. Another rattle, then silence. I waited. Every second stretched until it hurt. When I finally dared to peek through the blinds, he was gone. But the fear didn't leave. It just settled deeper, like dust in my lungs. I kept the lights off until morning. When the sun rose, I stepped outside again, pretending nothing had happened, pretending I wasn't unraveling from the inside out. The rock was gone. I told myself it was a good sign, but something about its absence felt worse. Like whoever left it wanted me to know they could come back anytime they wanted and take away whatever they pleased. By noon, I decided to leave. I packed up everything, secured the propane, disconnected the hookups. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory overriding fear. As I was coiling the hose, I saw him again, standing beside his Airstream, smoking, watching me. "Heading out early?" he asked, voice calm, almost friendly. I tried to sound casual. "Yeah, got a long drive." He smiled. "Safe travels, Mara." He shouldn't have known my name. I hadn't told him. Not once. Every nerve in my body went cold. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. My reflection in the windshield looked like a stranger, pale, shaking, eyes wide. As I drove out of the campground, I caught one last glimpse of him in the side mirror. He wasn't moving, just watching. I drove until I reached a small gas station 20 miles down the road, the kind with faded signs and a single pump that ticks too slow. I parked there for an hour, just breathing, trying to stop shaking. Part of me wanted to call the police, but what would I even say? A man watched me and maybe knocked on my RV. They'd tell me to stay somewhere else, to be careful. That's what everyone says when they don't have to live inside your fear. I ended up staying the night at a dispersed site just outside the park. No hookups, no people, just the open desert and the hum of cicadas. It should have felt safer being away from him, but isolation can twist even safety into something sinister. Every sound became suspicious. The rustle of a bush, footsteps, the groan of the wind, a voice. I left the lights off to blend into the dark, but that made every reflection in the window look like movement. I realized then that fear isn't about what's outside. It's about what starts to live inside you after. At some point, I must have fallen asleep sitting up. I woke to the sound of tires on gravel. Headlights swept across my windows. I froze. A vehicle was pulling into the clearing, slow, deliberate, not a ranger. Too late for that. Too careful to be lost. It parked about 20 yards away, engine idling, headlights still on. I couldn't see the driver's face, just the shape of a man sitting there, unmoving, watching. The light hit my windshield, blinding. I ducked, heart pounding, fingers gripping the keys. After a long moment, the engine turned off. Headlights too. Silence. That was somehow worse. I didn't know what to do. If I started the RV, he'd hear. If I stayed still, he'd wait. The desert felt endless, but in that moment it was a box, one I was trapped inside. Then, footsteps. Coming closer. I didn't think. I just turned the key and floored it. Gravel spat under the tires, engine roaring. My headlights cut through the dark as I tore down the dirt road, hands slick with sweat, breath coming in gasps. In the mirror, I saw his headlights flare to life again. He was following me. I drove without thinking, every muscle on fire. The road twisted, narrow and rough, bouncing the RV so hard I thought it would tip. Miles blurred. The speedometer needle trembled near the red. My whole world was the sound of the engine and the white lines flashing by. Finally, lights appeared ahead. A ranger station. I swerved into the lot, horn blaring, and the vehicle behind me slammed to a stop at the edge of the road. A ranger came out, flashlight raised. By the time I looked back, the other vehicle was gone. Just empty road. I stayed there the rest of the night, shaking, wrapped in a blanket while the ranger filled out a report. He was kind but cautious, asked if I got a plate number. I hadn't. When the sun rose, everything looked ordinary again. Beautiful, even. Zion doesn't care what happens under its cliffs. It just keeps standing there, silent and eternal. But I wasn't the same. I thought about that man's face, that calm voice saying safe travels, about how easily someone can look normal, kind, even, and still carry darkness behind their eyes. Before I left the ranger station, one of the younger officers said something that's stuck with me ever since. He said, "Most people who come out here, they think the desert's empty. But it's not. It's full of people who want to disappear." And for the first time, I realized maybe I was one of them too. I drove away that morning with the windows open, letting the wind drown out the noise in my head. I told myself I'd keep traveling, keep camping, but I'd never again ignore that small, quiet instinct that tells you when something isn't right. Because sometimes survival isn't about strength. It's about listening, really listening, before the knocking starts again. I left Zion behind me that day, but part of it never really let go. It's strange how silence can follow you, how it gets into the seams of everything. Even now, when I park somewhere new, I still hear the echo of that desert quiet, the kind that hums just low enough to hide what's moving underneath it. People think the road heals you. They see photos of sunsets, coffee mugs on dashboards, stars stretching forever over the roof of an RV. And yes, there's peace in it. But there's also a kind of exposure you can't understand until you've been alone in the dark, knowing no one would hear you if you screamed. When I think about that man, his smile, the way he said my name like he owned it, I realized the scariest part wasn't what he did, it was how normal he looked, how easy it was to mistake control for kindness. The world is full of people who test the edges of your comfort, who lean too close under the mask of concern, who call your fear overreaction. I used to think the right thing to do was stay polite, to be accommodating, not rude, not dramatic. But fear, real fear, doesn't care about manners. The lesson I learned that night didn't come from the knocking or the chase. It came from the moment before, when my instincts whispered something's wrong and I ignored them because I didn't want to seem paranoid. That's how danger gets in, not through the door, through doubt. Every time I tell this story, people ask me, "Do you still travel alone?" Yes, but differently. I trust my gut now, even when it doesn't make sense. I park closer to other campers. I keep my keys within reach. I look people in the eye long enough to read what they're not saying. And when I feel that small, invisible shift in the air, the one that says leave, I go. You can't always explain fear. You can only respect it. Zion was supposed to be my place of healing, a way to prove I could live without fear. But maybe healing isn't about being fearless. Maybe it's about finally understanding that fear isn't weakness. It's awareness. It's the mind's way of keeping the body alive. Sometimes I wonder where he is now. If he still camps in the same places, if he remembers my face, I hope not. But every once in a while, when I park under a sky that looks too wide, I catch myself glancing at the step before I go to bed, half expecting to see small, round rocks sitting there. And in that moment, I remember. The road doesn't always show you what's beautiful. Sometimes it shows you what you needed to learn to survive.